Questions to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement, quote, "This government's not prepared to turn its back on our most vulnerable citizens when they most need our help," end quote?
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, yes.
The Honourable Annette
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Does he receive information from his ministers on the impact his government's policies are having on the most vulnerable New Zealanders? For example, has the Minister of ACC told him that the changes to travel policy for ACC carers is denying a 91-year-old woman 1 hour a day home support desperately needed because the person who'd be providing the care ends up receiving $7 an hour as payment and can't afford to take the job?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, the Prime Minister does regularly receive advice from ministers about the impact of government policies, and it's been consistent advice that the government's decisions to retain all transfer payments, such as working for families and national superannuation, and in fact increase both of them in the budget, is having a positive impact on our most vulnerable citizens. And in individual cases, the Prime Minister expects ministers to look into those in detail, sometimes with the help of the opposition, to make sure New Zealanders are getting a fair go.
The Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, has he been told about the growing concern being expressed by the Disabled Persons Assembly at his government's policy as they impact on disabled people, leading their organisation to say this week that the overall picture for disabled people's welfare looks disturbing and the government's changes in the health area are likely to have a negative implications for disabled people?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, again, the Prime Minister does have the benefit of ministers who keep him informed and ministers who are very much attuned to the frontline services. And that member will be aware the government has committed to reducing the large, sprawling back office bureaucracy built up under Labor to move those resources to frontline services.
The Honourable Annette King.
Did the Minister of Finance discuss with him the decision to freeze funding set aside to establish safe drinking water in small, vulnerable New Zealand communities? And if so, was this unfortunate decision by his minister the reason New Zealand did not support the non-binding UN resolution seeking clean drinking water as a basic human right?
The Honourable Prime Minister. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the New Zealand government makes decisions about water quality in New Zealand, not the United Nations. And in fact, that fund would have been frozen along with just about all other items of government expenditure except those vital services of health and education. And in fact, representing probably more of those, as a representative of probably more of those small rural communities than anyone else in the House, I'd have to say many of them have found the government's regulation onerous and expensive.
Te uro flavu.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Reo Māori.
Te uro flavu.
Ki te pirimia, ko taku pātai pēnei ana, heha tāna whakautu ki te wero o te ripoata, What Works Counts, no te Rōpū Child Poverty Action Group, e kōrero ana nā te tirohanga whaiti o te kāwanatanga ki te pūmahi o ngā mātua, ko mahu atu ngā tamoreki ki te taha, ka aha ia ki te whakaruru hau i ngā tamoreki o ngā whānau e kāinga ana e te pūtea mimiti.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, we don't agree with the coalition that the government is single-mindedly focused on parents and work. In fact, we've sent up...
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, I know it's unusual to challenge the translation, but in some cases when some of us are trying to follow both, it does become clear when a clause of the member's question was not interpreted.
The member used both words there. It is an interpretation that members are receiving, and obviously the interpreter felt that he had interpreted the question that was being asked. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, it may be that you could rule that a whole clause of what the member said was irrelevant. I don't think it's right for the interpreter to do that. He finished before Mr Flavel did.
He certainly finished in terms of his voice, finished before Te Roroa Flavel did, but what I cannot determine is whether or not he had completed his interpretation of the question being asked. And and it's very difficult for me to rule on that. I can only assure the members that our interpreters do their very best to deliver the question. I think the Minister heard sufficient of the question to be able to answer it, and I invite the Minister to continue to answer it.
Mr Speaker, the government doesn't agree with the coalition that it has a single-minded focus on parents and work. I think the coalition is referring to an evaluation of working for families, which attempts to assess whether the working for families system had some benefit for families. The government has set up the Welfare Working Group precisely to address the issues of longer-term dependency, that is, those people who have been shut out of the workforce now for many years. I'm advised that in the background of that work that there are over 80,000 New Zealanders who are now classified as long-term beneficiaries, and we cannot afford to waste that much capacity in this economy or condemn them to the less than full lives that they can live on a benefit for year after year.
The Honourable Annette King.
In light of that answer then, is it the government's intention to increase payment for the children of beneficiaries, many of whom are living below the poverty line?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the first place, the government has, in the last budget, increased those payments by indexing them. And secondly, it's a bit rich coming from a government who was in for 9 years with the biggest surpluses that New Zealand governments have ever had. Why didn't they do it?
David Garrett. Order. I've called David Garrett.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. Does he agree that prison is no place for a 69-year-old man suffering from Parkinson's disease and probable dementia? And what steps is he taking to ensure that such people can be remanded to a more suitable place?
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I understand that the Minister of Health has been briefed on this case, that there is information related to it which can't be released because of privacy considerations, but the public can be reassured that the Ministry of Health is acting appropriately and has ample resources to respond to this case.
Brendan Burns.
Supplementary question. Was the government's refusal to today to support the UN resolution on safe water because at present about 1 in 6 vulnerable New Zealanders don't drink water that's known to be safe, or that a government bill proposes to privatise ratepayer-owned water supplies for up to 35 years?
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government has to focus on the significant deterioration in water quality that occurred under the previous government. Many of our rivers can no longer be swum in, and the water is not potable after 9 years of a government that was meant to be focused on sustainability and the environment. And we take that responsibility very seriously. It needs more direct action than some UN resolution.
Te Roroa Flavel.
Kia ora no koe, Mr Speaker, taku pātai ki te minita. Hei tā te United Nations Special Rapporteur, Professor Anaya, I kōrero nei, kei te pā atu ngā raru ohanga, raru hāpori hoki ki te iwi Māori, ka aha te kāwanatanga ki te whakatika I tēnei āhuatanga.
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government is working closely with the Maori Party and a number of others who are leaders in the Maori community to make progress in this respect. The measures that the government's focusing on currently are getting on with treaty settlements, and that's become a very positive and progressive process. Secondly, the introduction of whānau ora, which gives us the opportunity to get much closer to the people